In the 2000s, a major air conditioning company conducted a survey on how couples feel when they spend more time together. While 90% of newlywed couples felt happy about it, only about 60% of senior couples felt the same. On the other hand, while only 20% of husbands felt gloomy, as many as 50% of wives felt gloomy. After spending decades together, people may start noticing the unpleasant aspects of each other. Many women might feel exhausted having to be considerate when the amount of time spent together suddenly increases after retirement. However, even if you feel gloomy, it's best to be cautious about spreading complaints about your husband to others. After all, around 60% of senior couples are happy about spending more time together, indicating they have a good relationship. I am Olivia, 60 years old. Recently, my daughter's family and my son's family gathered to celebrate my 60th birthday. Photos taken with me at the center and letters painstakingly written by my 3 grandchildren are displayed in the room with my husband's Jacob's portrait. Look, Jacob! Even the little Isabella can walk now. As I proudly showed the photos, my husband Jacob in the picture looked envious. I wish I could have celebrated my birthday with you, Jacob. My softly muttered words melted into the empty room. 2 years ago, he passed away at the age of 58. It was so sudden that even after the funeral and holding his ashes, I couldn't believe it. I had taken it for granted that we would spend our old age together, and Jacob had promised that we would go to Europe when he turned 60, and we had been saving money little by little. We were a loving couple, I believe. For about 6 months after Jacob passed away, I was in a daze. But when my daughter Emma, who was pregnant before Jacob passed away, reached her due date, I finally snapped out of it. Emma came back to my house to give birth, and in the hustle and bustle, I got used to living without him. Still, sometimes, while picking out groceries at the supermarket or seeing Jacob's favorite comedian on TV, I feel a cold breeze in my chest. One day, I had the opportunity to have lunch with 2 friends from elementary school. Abigail, whose husband is 3 years older, has been a housewife for a long time. Her husband, who worked at a bank, retired, and she often complains about how it's unbearable to have him around all the time. Why do men stick to their wives as soon as they retire? It's so annoying. Well. To me, having a healthy husband seems enviable, but since my husband was never home all the time, I can't really understand Abigail's feelings. Well, Abigail has always been someone who complains a lot. Not only about her husband, but also about her PIL and her son's wife. It's a bit unpleasant, but I've gotten used to just letting it go. Our other friend, Ella, always has a smile. Abigail's husband must really love you. Stop it, come on. Whether she's naturally carefree or intentionally so, Ella always makes disarming comments that lighten the atmosphere. If it were just Abigail and me, our relationship might not have lasted, but thanks to Ella, it's been sustained for 50 years. It's been 50 years since those days when our skin stayed beautiful no matter how much we tanned. Since Jacob passed away and I alone turned 60, I've become somewhat sentimental. So we finally reached 60. We saved up to go to Europe when Jacob turned 60. I muttered while stirring milk into my tea. Abigail looked at me with disbelief. What? You saved money to go to Europe with your husband? You've always been such a goody two-shoes. Have I? I couldn't understand what was so pretentious about looking forward to a trip with him. She always laughed and called me a goody two-shoes whenever I did something she couldn't imagine doing herself. Though sometimes it bothered me, I had gotten used to it. On the other hand, Ella leaned in, her eyes sparkling. In that case, why don't we go on a trip together? Europe might be a bit too far, but we could stay at a hotel a little further away for 2 nights and 3 days. I've always dreamed of traveling with friends. Oh, that sounds wonderful. Ella's suggestion excited me. Traveling with childhood friends, how delightful that sounded. Then, Abigail leaned forward, her eyes sparkling as well. I'll go too. Are you on board too, Abigail? That makes me happy. I'll go. I'll go. After all, Olivia is paying for everything, right? What? I was stunned by her statement. Did Ella say we'd be traveling on my dime? I looked at Ella nervously, and she also seemed stunned, her mouth agape. Abigail, we were planning to pay for our own trip. What are you talking about, Ella? This is a trip where we're accompanying Olivia in place of her husband, right? Of course, Olivia should pay. Right? What? She pressured me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Next to me, Ella laughed. What are you talking about, Abigail? This is not a proxy trip for Olivia and her husband, it's a girls' trip for us. I'm going because I want to go, and Olivia's husband has nothing to do with it. But isn't it a waste not to use the travel funds Olivia's husband saved up? If she doesn't have any plans for it, using it together would be an act of friendship. There will be plenty of uses for it in the future. Olivia has many adorable grandchildren, after all. Ella gave me a clumsy wink, while I was taken aback by Abigail's argument. That's right. I promised to take my grandchildren to the amusement park next time, so maybe I'll use it then. Yeah. Humph. Ella seemed satisfied, but Abigail did not look convinced at all. Still, she wanted to go on the trip, so we decided to meet again later to plan the trip. Planning the trip was a lot of fun. Since I was the most accustomed to driving, I offered to drive. We agreed on a distance that wouldn't be too tiring, and settled on Charleston. Abigail insisted. We absolutely have to stay here. So we decided to stay at a slightly upscale hotel for 2 nights. She also listed a bunch of places she wanted to visit and things she wanted to eat, but they were all quite expensive. I couldn't help but ask the two of them. Are you too sure it's okay to splurge like this? Won't your husbands get mad? Ella laughed and said, I've hidden secret savings in the fridge for this day. Abigail brushed it off lightly. Yeah, it's fine. Though I had some reservations, it felt awkward to delve into household finances, even with friends. We'd never had financial troubles before, so it should be okay. Believing that, I focused on preparing for the trip. After all, I hadn't gone on an overnight trip with friends since I was single. Of course, I was excited. Packing for one person was so easy, maybe I'd even bring some card games. With a heart full of excitement like a child, I awaited the day of the trip. Then, the day of the trip arrived. To avoid getting sleepy while driving, I had gone to bed at 8 p.m. the night before, and I picked up the two of them at the meeting place. The atmosphere in the car was friendly, and we enjoyed snacks Ella had prepared while driving. After driving on the highway for a while, I needed to use the restroom, so we stopped at a service area. Leaving the two of them in the car, I went to the restroom and returned to find them outside the car for some reason. Ella, who was always smiling, had an angry expression, and Abigail was sulking, looking away. I had a bad feeling. What's wrong, you two? I asked nervously, and Ella answered without taking her eyes off Abigail. Abigail, she didn't bring any money. What? While you were in the restroom, we talked about buying some snacks, but Abigail hesitated. That's when we realized she didn't bring any money or credit cards. What? No way. We had agreed to pay for the accommodation upon arrival, and since I was driving, Abigail and Ella were supposed to cover the gas and highway tolls on the last day. Of course, there would be costs for meals and activities as well. Without cash or credit cards, nothing would work. I stared at Abigail in shock, and she glared back at me with heavily lined eyes.
It can't be helped. I forgot it.
Ella immediately denied Abigail's claim.
That's not true, is it? You told me earlier, didn't you? You said, let's pretend we both forgot our wallets and make Olivia pay for everything. Olivia has plenty of savings and insurance money, so it's fine.
Unbelievable. At that time, she backed down quickly, so I forgave it as a misunderstanding. But had she been thinking all along about how to use my money for this trip? This is the worst, absolutely the worst. I didn't say it aloud, but she must have sensed my disdain as I looked at her with contempt. Abigail pointed at me with a red face and loudly accused me.
It's not fair. You always get everything. Your inconvenient husband disappeared easily, and you got a lot of money. I'm struggling because of my husband and don't have any money to spend freely. It's not fair. Not fair. Why is it only you? You're blessed with children and grandchildren. You have money. Your husband died so easily. Not fair, not fair, not fair. You know what?
Ella grabbed her shoulders with a force that seemed ready to push her down. Ella, who is usually gentle and kind, was furious beyond recognition. Thanks to that, a cold wind seemed to blow from my fingertips through my mind. After quietly fiddling with my mobile phone, I separated Ella and Abigail. Then, standing with Ella at my back, I stared at Abigail. Seeing my expressionless face, devoid of anger or tears, Abigail took a nervous step back.
What do you want? Abigail, are you jealous of me because my husband died? Huh?
Abigail was startled by my direct question. However, she quickly became defiant and loudly declared, "Yes. Because your husband disappeared in an instant, didn't he? Without much medical expense, you got a lot of insurance money, so it's the best, isn't it? You're blessed. So what's the problem with using a little bit of it for me?"
I see, I understand.
When I nodded quietly, Abigail's face lit up triumphantly, thinking her argument had won. I averted my eyes from Abigail, went around to the back of the car, and opened the trunk. Then, I threw her branded Boston bag outside.
Huh?
Abigail let out a surprised cry at my sudden strange behavior.
Hey! What are you doing? Get out. What? Go home by yourself from here. Huh? Huh?
Abigail had a panicked expression.
Are you crazy? I can't get home by myself from the highway. Are you the crazy one? Did you really think I would pay for you? Did you think I would just take you to the destination hearing all this? You thought once you got in the car, you could somehow force your way through because I'm too kind, didn't you? I ignored the annoying parts because you're a friend. I didn't like your complaints, but maybe you were really suffering because of your husband. So, I didn't lecture you to cherish your husband while he's alive or say I'm envious of you because your husband is alive. Every marriage is different. But I don't want to associate with someone who says it's unfair to a grieving friend.
Though I was glaring at Abigail, my vision was blurred, as if it were rippling water.
I would have done anything to protect Jacob's life, no matter the cost or time. I wanted to turn 60 with him. I want pizza for dinner tonight.
Jacob, who I had seen off with a trivial morning conversation, never came home. When I arrived at the hospital, he was already cold. I couldn't do anything for him. And that's something to be envious of? That's being blessed? Don't joke with me. Don't joke with me. Olivia. Ella's gentle hand softly touched my back. I wiped my eyes with the fist I had unknowingly clenched and tried to calm myself. Even Abigail looked awkward. But it was too late. You can't take back what's been said. It's fine.
This service area can be accessed from the regular road, so you can call a cab.
What do you mean fine?
I have no money.
Then ask your husband to pick you up. You have a mobile phone, right?
Though, it would be incredibly shameless to rely on the husband you've been treating like a nuisance.
I threw Abigail's mobile phone, which had been left in the car.
Wait. I'll pay. I'll pay when we get home. What I said was just a joke. I only wanted to cheer up Olivia. We've been friends for 50 years. We can't break up over something like this, right? Right?
No.
I hate anyone who can dismiss this as something like this, whether they're a new acquaintance or a friend of 50 years. You.
Leaving the desperate Abigail, I got into the car, and Ella followed. Abigail hurriedly tried to open the door, but I quickly locked it and started the engine. She stepped back in surprise, and I hurriedly started the car.
Wait. No, wait. Please, wait.
Abigail's desperate cries were quickly drowned out by the sound of the engine. The car became quiet after that, and Ella's "I'm sorry" broke the silence, prompting us to open up about our feelings. Ella had her own grievances with Abigail, but since I never spoke up and she wanted to maintain the friendship, she let it slide. Abigail was not outright rude, she just complained a lot. Cutting off a longtime friend just because of some complaints felt too harsh. But we were both numb to it. Complaining about her husband being a burden in front of me, who had lost mine, was extremely insensitive. We aired our long-held grievances and felt relieved. We decided to continue to Charleston together. I offered to pay for Abigail's canceled portion since I had kicked her out, but Ella insisted.
I invited you.
After a bit of back and forth, Ella's eyes lit up.
Why don't we call Scarlett, who moved to Charleston? She's always up for an adventure.
Scarlett, a friend from middle school, had been a backpacker when she was single and was very active. We had no objections, so Ella called her without hesitation. Despite the sudden invitation, Scarlett was thrilled and immediately consulted her husband. Then she joined us in our car. From that point on, it was like a dream. After enjoying hot apple pie at a famous cafe, we checked into our hotel. We admired the hotel's renowned garden and paintings, enjoyed a 5-grade beef at their teppanyaki restaurant, and had a girls' night in the room with cakes we had bought earlier. The next day was filled with art appreciation. Traveling with friends who get along so well was astonishingly enjoyable. Ella's kindness and Scarlett's straightforward nature made them perfect travel companions. Scarlett, who remained active even after marriage, had stories of worlds we had never experienced. She was such a good storyteller that Ella and I kept begging for more. On the last day of our trip, we held hands reluctantly and promised to go on another trip together. Returning to my familiar home, I took a deep breath. Traveling is fun, but only because you have a place to come back to.
Jacob, I'm home.
I placed Jacob's favorite biscuits next to his photo and started talking to him. Suddenly, the video doorbell rang. Forcing my tired feet to stand, I checked the monitor. There on the screen was an older man with an angry expression and Abigail, whom we had left at the rest area 2 days ago. The joyous feelings from the trip vanished instantly. I knew she would come. Bracing myself for her arrival, I suppressed the urge to pretend I wasn't home and opened the front door. The elderly man, Abigail's husband Ethan, glared at me in silence. Since they weren't speaking, I had to ask,
"What brings you here so late? Playing dumb after what you did?"
Abigail looked up at me with a resentful gaze.
What do you mean by what I did?
When I feigned ignorance, Ethan's eyes narrowed.
You left Abigail at a rest area, didn't you? Don't tell me you've already forgotten that just 2 days ago, at 60 years old.
Oh, right. What happened after that? I assume you made it home since you're here.
I had to pick her up. Do you abandon longtime friends like that after a little argument? And I heard you took money from her wallet because of cancellation fees. Are you out of your mind?
Excuse me? A little argument? Took her money? That's quite different from the truth. I glanced at Abigail. She started speaking in a small voice, hiding behind Ethan. Olivia got tired of my stories about my husband. I know it's hard for you since you just lost yours. I'm really sorry. But leaving me there and taking my money was too cruel. If Ethan hadn't helped me, who knows what would have happened.
But I'll forgive you if you and Ella apologize and return the money. We've been friends for 50 years, after all.
Abigail finished her self-serving speech, covering her face with her hands as if to cry. What? You're 60, right? You're not a child. Ethan, completely taken in by her lies, glared at me as if I were his mortal enemy.
I told her to cut ties with you and go to the police, but Abigail insists on forgiving you. How could you be so cruel to someone as kind as Abigail?
Sure, if her version were true, we'd be inhumane monsters. If it were true, that is.
Ethan, it seems she and we have different understandings of the events. What? First, she didn't have any money to begin with. We argued because she insisted on traveling for free using my late husband's inheritance. What?
She's envious of me being a widow.
She kept saying how unfair it was that I gets all the benefits. What?
Ethan was taken aback by my revelation. Abigail, with tears in her eyes, clung to her husband.
I would never say such a thing. You worked so hard until retirement and let me be a housewife. How could I be dissatisfied with you? That's right.
I always want you to outlive me. Isn't that right?
That's right. You're not a foolish woman who wishes for my early death.
Ethan gently embraced her shoulders. Abigail smiled as if she had one. Indeed, without evidence, our usual conversations and the trouble at the rest area could be twisted with lies. Without evidence, that is. I fiddled with the mobile phone in my hand and opened the voice recorder app. Then, I displayed it in front of Ethan.
That foolish woman is your wife. What?
I pressed the play button on the screen. From the mobile phone, with the volume set to maximum, our conversation at the rest area played clearly. At first, Ethan listened in silence, but his expression grew darker and darker. The moment her voice began to play, Abigail, with a pale face, lunged at my phone, but I stepped aside, and she crashed to the ground. After the 5-minute recording finished playing, a terrifying silence fell over the entrance.
What is this about?
Ethan, his face a mask of suppressed rage, asked her. She jumped in fright.
It's not what it sounds like. What's not? That you lied to me? Or that you want me to die soon? It's not true. It's all lies, a conspiracy.
Sweating nervously, she desperately tried to make excuses. How pathetic. Reluctantly, I presented another piece of evidence.
If this isn't enough, should I get the data from Ella too? What?
Ella was recording our discussions about the trip. She didn't want to take notes.
Since you always badmouth Ethan as if it were second nature, there should be plenty of evidence. What?
Did you forget about that?
Sweat
Sweat poured from her forehead. Yes, Ella had openly recorded our trip discussions with our consent. Although Abigail had been quiet when the recording started, she must have forgotten about it during the conversation because she reverted to her usual habit of badmouthing Ethan and her in-laws. Even if she hadn't, Ethan could tell from her reaction what she was usually like.
You! Eek!
Abigail let out a pathetic scream at Ethan's terrifying, ground-crawling voice. The anger and disappointment of being betrayed by the wife he trusted and humiliated in front of others must have been immense.
Please discuss this with your wife. I don't need an apology or the cancellation fee. As long as she never appears before me again, that will suffice. Got it?
We're sorry. With that, Ethan pulled Abigail's arm and left. Interacting with him like this made me realize that Ethan seemed like a sensible person who believed in Abigail's words and was willing to accept his mistakes and apologize. Well, even in a marriage, there are things that are unforgivable or don't go well. Since the pleasant afterglow of the trip had completely faded, I decided to relax with a glass of red wine while looking at the many photos I had taken. Later, Ethan arranged a formal apology meeting with me and Ella. After returning home and confronting Abigail, she had furiously told him,
"It's your fault."
It seemed the shock was considerable for Ethan, who had worked hard to ensure that Abigail and the children lived comfortably, only to be wished away by his wife. Although he acknowledged that he might have been inadequate, he couldn't bring himself to spend the rest of his life with a wife who wished for his unhappiness, so he proposed a divorce. Surprisingly, Abigail, who had always despised Ethan, was shocked. She had never imagined that Ethan would be the one to suggest a divorce. Apparently, she believed he couldn't live without her. Of course, at his age, still in his early 60s, with strong legs and no serious illnesses, he could live just fine on his own. Moreover, their son, William, had offered,
"If you divorce Mom, you can live near us, Dad."
This proposal drove her into a frenzy. However, William's wife, Arya, had firmly rejected it, stating,
"Ethan is harmless, but Abigail tried to feed the baby honey and used her spoon to feed the baby. I can't deal with someone who goes berserk when corrected. We need to cut ties with her in that case."
She had always complained that Arya was unreasonable and cold, but it turned out that it was Abigail, the MIL, who was the unreasonable one. Thus, at the age of 60, Abigail ended up losing both her family and friends. Although she had enough from the division of assets to maintain a minimal lifestyle, it wasn't enough to afford hobbies or travel. Even when she tried to participate in neighborhood gatherings, her troublesome personality caused so many problems that she couldn't make any close friends. She even sent me letters detailing her loneliness and pitiable situation, but I never replied. After all, in the final chapter of my life, I want to live peacefully with friends and family who are like-minded. 2 years later.
This seafood pasta is incredibly delicious. It might be the best pasta I've ever had in my life. The best in my 60 years. You should tell the waiter that.
Look at that guy steering the gondola. He's as handsome as Johnny Depp. I wonder if he'll look this way. Ella and I were both engrossed, me in the seafood pasta brimming with mussels and shrimp, and Ella in the handsome gondolier. Scarlett watched us with amusement, sipping her wine. I was now in Italy for the first time in my life. When I told Scarlett about the European trip I had promised to take with the late Jacob, "In that case, why don't you go to Europe and bring back lots of stories to share?" she suggested. Scarlett and Ella both got their husbands' consent, and the three of us decided to travel together. While I wasn't worried about Scarlett, I did worry about Ella.
"I've made quite a bit from stocks,"
she reassured me with a sly smile. Her shrewdness, hidden beneath her innocent demeanor, was part of her charm. even though it was just a one-week trip and we only planned to visit Italy and Germany. It was more than enough for me, someone who had hardly ever traveled abroad. Riding a gondola in Venice, just as Jacob had wanted to, would be a great story to bring back. I decided to use what Jacob left me to enjoy life for the both of us. Some might think I'm being selfish, like Abigail, but I don't care. No matter what anyone says, I'll spend the money Jacob left me for myself. Because I believe that's what he would want me to do. In the ancient streets of Venice, the sunlight reflected off the shimmering water. The bustling sounds of the Rialto fish market carried on the wind to my ears. Even though my eyesight was starting to fade and my hearing was getting worse, I wanted to remember all the sounds, smells, and sunlight and take them back home. Jacob, smiling in his photograph, would surely be looking forward to hearing my stories. That day, we were having a barbecue in the yard with our daughter Katie and her husband Brian. Under the warm sunshine, the smell of grilling meat wafted through the air. The beer is running low. Kristen, could you grab some more from the shed and put them in the fridge? My husband Daniel said to me. Got it. 4 or 5 bottles, okay?
Hey, Brian, can you help Mom? Make sure to chill all the beers.
Katie asked Brian as well. Brian smiled and said, Of course, and followed me to the shed at the back of the yard. The shed was relatively new, currently holding a few boxes of beer. When I opened the door and reached for a box in the dim shed, Brian suddenly pushed my back and tried to make me sit on the ground. Reflexively, I twisted my neck to look at Brian's face. Seeing his unusually desperate expression, I was instantly filled with fear, thinking I might be attacked.
Hey, what are you doing?
I tried to shout, but Brian, looking a bit flustered, whispered, Please, just bear with me for a moment.
What?
There's something I really need to check. Brian looked at me with an unusually serious gaze, not his usual kind smile. And together, we witnessed something unbelievable. My name is Kristen. It was a pleasantly sunny spring day. My husband Christopher had passed away after a short battle with illness. Since losing Christopher, my daughter Katie and I had been living modestly, just the two of us. For years, it was just me and Katie, until I met Daniel through a friend. He was the same age as the late Christopher and bore a slight resemblance to him. At first, we were just good friends, but gradually, Daniel and I started to become aware of each other in a different way. However, walking beside Daniel and occasionally catching myself smiling made me feel guilted towards Christopher. Take your time. I'm in no rush at all, Daniel would say with a gentle smile, walking a little ahead of me. His kindness drew me in, but I was troubled by my inability to let go of Christopher, who was no longer in this world. Years later, I took over the care of Christopher's grave and shrine from his relatives. Christopher's sister placed her hand gently on my shoulder, not meeting my eyes, but said in a very kind voice, "Thank you for everything." She smiled. I bowed my head, hiding my overflowing tears, thinking I might never visit Christopher's grave again. A few months later, I decided to marry Daniel. We moved into a new house, and I decided to start fresh, throwing away all my clothes and furniture. Keeping any memorabilia of Christopher in our new life seemed like it would hurt Daniel. At first, Katie seemed confused, but she gradually warmed up to him. Before our remarriage, Daniel and Katie had often spent time together as friends, so I think she got used to it quickly. Katie had just turned 15. At that sensitive age, she started wearing flashy makeup and going out more often, quickly beginning to sweet-talk Daniel for pocket money. Because originally, my life with Katie was never wealthy, and I couldn't afford to buy her the things she liked. Unlike me, who was particularly strict about money, Daniel was lenient with Katie. Without asking much, he would take out his wallet and hand over money whenever she said she was going out with friends. When I later cautioned Daniel about this behavior, he responded with a troubled expression.
I'm sorry, but it seems like money is the only way I can get Katie to be nice to me.
He continued to treat Katie specially in trivial matters other than money. I felt as if he was treating her like a princess, which made me happy as if it were happening to me. He was doing his best to love both Katie and me. I kept the wedding ring, my last memory with Christopher, at the very back of my shelf and occasionally took it out to look at it. However, feeling that it was somehow wrong, I sent it all to Christopher's parents along with a simple letter. I'm sorry, but I want to move forward. Am I allowed to be happy? I don't know, but I sincerely wish to be happy. Eventually, Katie became so close to Daniel that she was always by his side. While that was very pleasing, it was also somewhat concerning.
Hey, Dad. I want a new bag, but I'm a bit short on pocket money. What should I do?
Which one? What kind of bag? Daniel peered happily at the screen of the mobile phone Katie handed to him. The screen showed a famous brand bag that even I knew. Katie was scrolling through the phone screen to show him the price, and Daniel scratched his head with a slightly troubled face. It's quite expensive. But, well, it's Katie's request.
Really? Yay! Thanks, Dad.
Katie hugged him, and Daniel smiled. Since I got married, it seemed that Katie's sense of money had become strange. Perhaps it was a reaction to the frugal life we led just the two of us. She started demanding things from Daniel, who would buy anything with a smile.
Katie, don't waste too much money. It's okay. I won't ask Mom. Right, Dad?
She looked at Daniel and laughed happily.
You know, I'll marry someone handsome and kind like Dad in the future.
At those words, Daniel smiled even more happily. After making the promise, Katie returned to her room to study. Katie hoped to go to nursing school after graduating from high school and had started studying seriously for the exams. To avoid disturbing her studies, we didn't turn on the TV at home, and I placed a small radio in the kitchen to keep playing. Our life was very happy. It might have been so happy that I sometimes forgot the fact that Christopher had died. But sometimes, when the radio played the music that was popular when I was young, it reminded me. The melody, the lyrics, squeezed my heart and brought tears to my eyes.
Don't make such a sad face. It's just a bag.
Daniel said something completely off the mark, and I forced a smile. I pulled myself together and warned that we shouldn't keep giving Katie money whenever she asked. Because Daniel had started his own business when he was young and recorded some payments as company expenses. It wasn't a commendable act, and it could potentially affect the company's management situation, so even though I strongly warned him, Daniel continued to ignore my opinion.
You're just too kind.
Days like that continued, and Katie safely entered nursing school and began living on her own after graduation. Katie is working hard as a nurse. When Katie turned 25, she started dating a man her age named Brian, and they decided to get married. When she first introduced Brian to our home, I was surprised, trying not to show it on my face. Katie always used to say,
I'm going to marry a handsome man.
But Brian, while being a good young man, was not conventionally handsome. Brian, who wore a gentle smile and had a kind impression, was reportedly the son of a wealthy family and dressed in well-bred clothes. After the marriage, they often returned home, and Brian always treated Daniel and me kindly, making me feel reassured that Katie had married a good person. One day, Daniel suggested having a barbecue in our backyard. The weather was good, with a piercing blue sky and a few larks chirping. Daniel, who had been eagerly preparing since early morning, was skillfully grilling meat and chatting happily with Katie. Brian was looking for the larks chirping in the sky, but after a while, he gave up and poured himself a drink. "Oh, it looks like we're running out of beer. Kristen, could you add more from the storage room to the fridge?"
Got it. How about 4 or 5? Brian, can you help Mom? Please chill all the beers.
Brian smiled and, "Of course." He readily agreed, following me to the storage room at the back of the yard. The storage room was relatively new, with only a few boxes of beer stacked inside. When I opened the door and tried to lift a box from the dimly lit back of the storage room, Brian, who was behind me, forcibly held my back and tried to make me sit on the ground.
Hey, what are you doing?
I tried to shout in surprise, but Brian, looking a bit flustered, whispered, "Sorry. Just bear with me for a moment.
What?
I need to confirm something." Before I could respond, he peeked out from the dim storage room door to check the outside. It was a sunny day, with the blue grass of the yard reflecting brightly. Our figures in the dim storage room were likely invisible to Daniel and Katie. After watching Daniel and Katie from a distance for a while, Katie moved closer to Daniel, leaning on his arm. Katie rubbed her face against Daniel's arm, laughing happily. Their voices were faint but audible. The larks' cries echoed inside the storage room, making it hard to hear their voices clearly. Brian was staring at them intently. Could it be that Brian is jealous of them getting along? Noticing that I had unintentionally laughed, he pointed. Katie looked around and intertwined her arm with Daniel's. Though a bit flustered, Daniel also looked around before happily accepting Katie. It looked like more than a parent-child relationship. The larks' cries ceased. With no wind and no sound of insects, even from a distance, I could hear Daniel and Katie's voices faintly but clearly.
Brian hasn't noticed at all. Isn't it funny?
Kristen is the same. Normally, no one would imagine this.
But this kind of relationship is exciting and fun, right?
I was stunned, listening to their conversation. I couldn't keep up with what was happening. Katie took a transparent bag of powder out of her pocket and lightly mixed it into the glasses that Brian and I were drinking from.
Did you put something in Brian's and my glass?
That's probably a sleeping pill. She secretly visited a psychiatrist recently.
A sleeping pill? Secretly visiting a psychiatrist?
I had no idea what was going on, but how should I take the fact that Katie put a sleeping pill in Brian's and my glasses? We shouldn't stay here any longer. Let's go, but don't use those glasses. After that, Brian and I pretended not to know anything and returned to Katie and Daniel. Katie seemed a little unnatural, glancing at my glass several times. Just knowing she tried to make me drink something weird was shocking enough and made me feel dizzy, betrayed by the Katie I had raised all these years.
Sorry, but I think I've had too much sun. I need to rest inside.
Sure. I'll take care of the cleanup, so go ahead and rest. Lying on the bed in the room, I stared blankly at the ceiling. Why did she put in a sleeping pill? And the way Daniel and Katie were behaving seemed a bit strange. My head hurt more as I wrestled with the thoughts of maybe and there's no way in my mind. After lying down for a while, I fell asleep. In the evening, I went out to the yard, and the cleanup was already done. Brian and Katie seemed to be about to leave, and Brian gave me a look as if he wanted to say something but then looked around and closed his mouth. Are you okay now? After Brian and Katie left, Daniel acted as if nothing had happened and showed concern for me. His words, voice, and everything sounded like lies, and I forced a strained smile. You still don't look well. Should I make dinner? He rolled up his sleeves and checked the fridge. Ah, I remembered there was some meat left from yesterday while the image of him putting a sleeping pill in my glass flashed in my mind. I forcefully pushed his body away.
I'll make it.
I quickly made a simple meal. There was no way I could eat anything he made right now. For several days, I was hesitant to touch any of the food or drinks in the house. What if they had been pre-drugged? Thinking like that, I also suspected eavesdropping or hidden cameras, making life at home unbearable. One day, I received a call from Brian on my mobile phone. Apparently, Brian had talked to his parents about the suspicion of the sleeping pill. Brian's father, Andrew, suggested a temporary place for me to stay.
It's driving me crazy living with Daniel right now. I'm so grateful for this offer. It's a relative's vacation home, and it's free for now, so stay as long as you like. Also, I'd like to talk once with my dad.
Brian's voice over the phone was somber. Of course, it was. His wife might be having an affair with another man. And that man. No, I don't want to think about anything right now. Later, I lied to Daniel.
On a trip.
Saying a friend invited me. I had told him that the headache from the barbecue had been lingering, so a friend invited me to rest, I explained. Great. Have a good time. Maybe I'll invite Katie over for dinner. Daniel said it naturally, without any guilt, and I felt a chill of disgust. Later, I went to the address Brian had given me and visited a relative's vacation home. Brian came to pick me up by car at the station where I arrived after changing trains.
Thank you so much for coming all the way out here.
He bowed his head deeply, looking sincerely apologetic. Even though he went out of his way to prepare a hiding place for me. I felt something welling up inside me because of Brian's kindness. The area seemed to be a region where vacation homes were lined up, and there were several beautiful houses. The vacation home was surrounded by many trees. Brian's father, Andrew, was standing in front of the entrance waiting for me. It was the third time I had met him. At the family meeting, the wedding, and now. Katie had told me he was quite wealthy, which made me a little intimidated, so I bowed deeply, expressing my gratitude for sheltering me.
Thank you very much.
Sorry to start right away, but let's discuss inside. As soon as we entered the vacation home, we started talking with Brian and Andrew. Apparently, Brian had already told his parents that they had been drugged with sleeping pills. And he explained how it was suspicious that Katie had spent more money than his salary since their marriage. It was a bit awkward for me because Katie is my daughter.
We also need to clarify the source of the money Katie is spending. My dad is going to suggest donating to Daniel's business, so why don't we wait and see?
The phrase wait and see caught my attention. What could we learn from just waiting and seeing? What kind of conclusion will come from what we are about to do? Brian seemed to sense my hesitation, and when our eyes met, he smiled.
Maybe we are misunderstanding. Let's be a little sneaky to make sure we can live peacefully again.
I couldn't help but laugh at Brian's words. A misunderstanding? Surely, definitely not. We were just trying to clarify an answer that we were almost certain of. After a few days of regaining my composure living in the vacation home Brian lent me, I felt bad about staying indefinitely, so I decided to return home. A few weeks later, Andrew officially contacted Daniel's company to offer a donation. Since he was a wealthy man, the proposal was immediately trusted, and Daniel and Katie were delighted without checking the specific date of the funding. I quietly spent my time, ignoring their joy. After returning home, I found it a bit painful to stay inside, so I made it a habit to take walks recently. Right in front of my house, there is a field of wheat, with green stalks of the same height stretching out. Walking along the rarely trafficked paved road, I looked up at the larks flying far away. life after the donation offer was like living in luxury. Daniel believed he had received the funding and bought a luxury car under the guise of a company vehicle. As for Katie, she continued to splurge on beauty treatments and nail salons, even when their savings ran out. They seemed to have a naive expectation that the funds would come in eventually. One day, we had a dinner meeting to discuss the funding. Daniel, Katie, Brian, and Andrew were coming to our house. Daniel bent his back, repeatedly thanking Andrew. "We really owe so much to Brian. Katie always says she's so happy to have married such a wonderful person." Daniel was trying to curry favor with Andrew, but Andrew didn't even give him a polite smile, instead quietly placing a folder on the table in front of them. Thinking it was a document related to a donation, Daniel said happily,
"Thank you very much."
But as he read through the contents, his face quickly turned pale.
"We did some research on your company while considering funding, and some shocking facts came to light."
Daniel, sweating profusely, scanned the document. The document contained two main points: evidence of an affair between Daniel and Katie, and a tax audit of expenses that had been falsely claimed as company costs. Seeing the proof of Katie's affair with Daniel made me want to cover my face in shame. Katie had been buying jewelry and spa treatments, charging them all to the company's expenses, which led to back taxes.
"We cannot provide funding to a company like this. This is ridiculous."
Daniel, visibly shaken, spilled his coffee. Katie, who was nearby, quickly stood up with trembling hands to clean the spill. "Katie, I'm divorcing you and will be seeking compensation in the divorce court."
"What? Compensation in the divorce court? What are you talking about?"
"You cheated on me. It's only natural. And Kristen too." With that, Brian looked at me. Daniel, staring at the document, turned his frightened gaze towards me.
"I'm also divorcing Daniel and will be seeking compensation. What kind of nonsense is this? This can't be happening."
Daniel, choking on his words, dropped the document to the floor, trembling. Katie, with a scared expression, moved closer to Daniel and pointed at Brian with quivering lips.
No, it was you who was having the affair. Brian and Mom were having an affair."
Katie continued to scream irrational excuses and shift the blame until the very end. They kept making desperate excuses, but the evidence was undeniable. Finally, as if resigning to his fate, Daniel slumped his shoulders and began to speak.
"I started a relationship with Katie, but I realized there was no love there,"
he said. At first, he had resisted Katie's advances, knowing she was only after his money. But as Katie became more physically attractive and I, on the other hand, aged and lost my charm, he made his choice. "I'm just a man. We're not even blood related. I couldn't resist." Katie had suggested putting sleeping pills in our drinks on the day of the barbecue. After making Brian and me drink the sleeping pills, they planned to strip us and put us in the same bed, taking photos to blackmail us for money. How shallow could they be? I looked at the two of them with a cold stare, beyond contempt. "I'm really sorry. Please forgive me. I beg you."
"I'm also very sorry. I don't want to break up with you, Brian."
I said nothing, just watched the two of them continue to apologize. I couldn't find any words. There was no way I could forgive them. I couldn't possibly forgive them. Seeing my silence, Katie eventually looked up and yanked on Daniel's sleeve forcefully.
"This is all your fault. How are we supposed to handle the credit card bills next week? What were you thinking, spending all that money? I also have debts from gambling. We're broke. What are we going to do?"
This is exactly what one would call a scene of utter chaos. Katie is pulling at Daniel's hair and clothes forcefully, continuing her aggressive actions, while he is desperately trying to stop her by shouting. Their yelling voices are surely reaching the ears of the neighbors. Even though they are stepchildren, knowing that they had a relationship would make it impossible for anyone with common sense to continue living in this neighborhood. That surely applies to me as well. When I think that I won't be able to see the view outside the window anymore, I feel a bit sad. After that, Katie and Brian divorced and moved far away. Katie got involved in the nightlife, but her life didn't go well, and she drowned in alcohol, continuing to accumulate debt. Daniel, after paying a large amount of alimony from the divorce trial, was also burdened with debt repayment and his company went bankrupt. He disappeared as if fleeing, and now he is said to be homeless, hiding somewhere. Brian, after divorcing Katie, learned from his failed marriage and found a good match. I received alimony from Daniel in the divorce trial. Even though his company went bankrupt and he was burdened with debt repayment, it's unclear how he managed to come up with a large sum of money, but he showed his capability at the last moment. After divorcing Daniel and selling our house, I decided to return to my parents' home. On the plane back to my parents' home, I thought about many things. I lost Christopher to illness, remarried, then divorced again, and was betrayed by my daughter. What kind of face should I show my parents now? There are many wheat fields around my parents' home. Pulling a large suitcase, I kept walking down the long asphalt road. It was warm enough to make me sweat. The season was about to welcome early summer. When I returned to my parents' home, they accepted me without asking any questions, but why didn't they ask me anything? Were they pitying me? Even so, they naturally accepted me. While gazing at the serene rural landscape, I realized I needed to look at my life ahead. Thanks to Dad's connections, I got a job at the local agricultural cooperative and felt I had established my life foundation. Since then, I have built a good relationship with Andrew, and although we don't see each other often, we occasionally have meals together when he comes near. It was spring, a few years after I returned to my parents' home. It was a sudden event. On the desk, there was a wedding ring I received from the late Christopher. I was a bit shaken and held the ring in my palm, gazing at it. While I was standing there in shock, Mom came over from the kitchen with her bent back and wiped the table. Christopher's parents came a long time ago and said they wanted Kristen to have this. I stood there, unable to say anything. Outside the window, there are wheat fields. Beyond the clear landscape, I am here. A skylark continues to sing as if asserting its presence. Tears well up, and I sling my bag over my shoulder and ride off on my bike. I keep riding through the deserted wheat fields, sweating on my forehead but continuing forward. What should I do from now on? I don't know. But I will keep going. I'll save my complaints for the very end, after I've lived my life to the fullest.